91-year-old black waitress is fired for helping Jeff Bezos. What she saw the next day made her cry. Lola stood frozen, staring at the piece of paper in her trembling hands. It was the pink slip, the dreaded termination notice. But this one was different. She hadn't been fired for doing anything wrong. In fact, she had been praised just a few hours earlier. The reason for her dismissal? Helping Jeff Bezos. It had started with a simple request. He was sitting alone in the corner booth of her diner, a place that had served food to everyone from local farmers to visiting businessmen. Lola, at 91, had been serving customers here for decades, never once missing a beat. But today was different. "Excuse me, miss," the man in the corner booth had said, raising his hand slightly, his voice soft but confident. She had looked up and paused, sensing something familiar in his voice, but not immediately recognizing him. It wasn't until she saw the flash of a smile that she made the connection. He was Jeff Bezos, the billionaire founder of Amazon. But she didn't let it show. She was no stranger to important figures passing through her diner. "How can I help you?" Lola asked, her voice steady, masking the small flutter of nerves that ran through her. He smiled and ordered a simple breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon. Nothing extravagant, just the kind of meal a hard-working person might want to start their day. She took the order with a warm, professional nod. "Just make sure the eggs are soft," he added. Lola had a lot of experience, and the way he said it made her understand he wasn't picky. He just knew what he liked. As she prepared his food, she couldn't help but think of how the world viewed this man, one of the richest people alive, a man who had changed the way the world shopped, who had made billions, while she, just a waitress, had lived a humble life, working to keep her small diner afloat. But none of that mattered in the moment. He was just a man and Lola was just Lola, working to do her job well. When the food was ready, Lola brought it to him, smiling as she placed the plate in front of him. "Here you go, Mr. Bezos. Enjoy." "Thank you," he said, smiling back at her. And then something unexpected happened. He glanced up from his plate, his eyes meeting hers, and he said something that shook her to her core. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you do me a favor?" he asked. Lola was used to people making small requests. Maybe they wanted extra ketchup or needed a napkin. But this was different. "I'm listening," she replied, curious. "My phone's dead, and I really need to make an urgent call," he said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "Could you let me use your phone? It'll just be a minute. I promise I won't take up too much of your time." Without thinking, Lola nodded. She'd seen people ask for worse. "Of course," she said, "just give me a second." She had led him to the back of the diner, where her landline sat on the counter. She handed him the receiver, then turned to go back to her duties. She could hear him talking quietly on the other end, his voice low but urgent. For some reason, she didn't feel the need to eavesdrop. As he hung up, he turned to her and said, "Thank you, Lola. I really appreciate it." She smiled politely, not knowing how to respond. The man was, after all, a billionaire. But to her, he was just a person who needed help, and she had helped him. But little did she know, this simple act of kindness would change everything. The next morning, Lola arrived at the diner, as usual, only to find her boss, Janet, waiting for her at the front door. Janet was holding a letter in her hand, her expression tight with concern. "Lola," Janet said, her voice hesitant, "we need to talk." Lola felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been working here for over 40 years, but something in Janet's tone told her that today wouldn't be like any other conversation. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," Janet continued, handing her the letter. "You're being let go?" Lola's heart dropped. "What? Why?" Janet hesitated. "It's because of what happened yesterday. You helped Jeff Bezos." Lola blinked, confused. "I helped him. What do you mean?" "You let him use your phone, Lola. It's against company policy. We don't allow customers to use the phones. It's a liability issue." "But he's Jeff Bezos," Lola protested, her voice rising in disbelief. "He's a billionaire. I didn't even think about it. I was just trying to be helpful." "I understand," Janet said, her voice softer now. "But the company has a policy. And after what happened, we have to let you go. I'm sorry, Lola. You're one of our best waitresses, but rules are rules." Lola felt a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness wash over her. She had been fired for doing something kind, for helping someone in need. The next morning, after the shock had worn off, Lola sat at home, staring at the phone, unsure of what to do next. She couldn't believe it. She had worked for that diner her entire life, and now she was out of a job because she had helped someone. But little did she know, this was just the beginning. The next day would bring something that would make her cry, something that no one could have predicted. And that's when it happened. Lola's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Lola," the voice on the other end said. It was deep, confident, and instantly recognizable. It was Jeff Bezos. Lola's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the voice. She wasn't sure if she had heard correctly, or if it was some kind of prank. But then she heard the name again, clear and unmistakable. "Lola, it's Jeff Bezos." Her hand shook slightly as she held the receiver, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Mr. Bezos?" she asked, almost incredulously. "Yes, that's right. I'm really sorry to bother you, but I need to speak with you about something important." Lola sat down on the edge of her worn-out couch, still in disbelief. The billionaire who had changed the world was calling her. The same Jeff Bezos she had served a simple breakfast to only the day before. What on earth could he want? "Of course," Lola replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What's going on?" There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "First of all, I want to say thank you. What you did yesterday, letting me use your phone. It may have seemed small, but it actually meant a lot to me." Lola was silent for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. This didn't make any sense. Why would he care about something so trivial? She hadn't thought twice about helping him, but now it seemed to matter far more than she had realized. "It wasn't anything," she said, trying to brush it off. "I was just helping out a customer, Mr. Bezos. I didn't even think twice about it." "I know," Jeff said. "But what you don't know is that the call I made was crucial. It was a call to my team. I needed to make a decision, and because of your help, I was able to do that. And I'll never forget it." Lola was stunned. She didn't know what to say. Was he thanking her for something so simple? Was it possible that this was more than just a polite gesture? "I'm really sorry to hear about what happened at the diner," Jeff continued. "I know you were let go because of that, and that's completely unfair. You did nothing wrong." Lola's throat tightened. She had tried not to think about the firing too much, but it had been hard to ignore. After 40 years of work, after all the long hours and hard days, she was being tossed aside over a single moment of kindness. It felt like a slap in the face. That's very kind of you to say," Lola replied, her voice catching slightly. "But what can I do about it? It's already done." "I've got an idea," Jeff said. There was a pause, and Lola could hear him shifting in his seat on the other end of the line. "I want to offer you something, Lola. I want to help you." Lola blinked, confused. "Help me? But how? I'm just an old waitress. I don't know anything about business or tech or anything like that." "I'm not offering you a job in tech," Jeff said with a chuckle. "I'm offering you something more valuable. I want to help you rebuild your life. You shouldn't have been treated the way you were at that diner, and I'm going to make sure that you're treated right from now on." Lola didn't understand. "But what do you mean? What are you offering?" "First," Jeff continued, "I've arranged for you to have a meeting with my team. We're going to make sure you get some compensation for what happened. You deserve that much. And second, I want to help you start something for yourself. Something that's all yours, something you've always wanted to do." Lola was still struggling to keep up. This didn't seem real. How could this billionaire, this man who could buy entire companies, want to help someone like her? She was just a small-town waitress who had been fired for doing the right thing. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, trying to wrap her head around the idea. "I'm fine. I'll figure something out. I've always figured things out." "I'm sure you have," Jeff said. "But this is different. You didn't deserve to lose your job over something like that. And I want to make sure you know that someone sees you, Lola. Someone appreciates what you did. So please, let me help you." Lola was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing. She had never been one to ask for help. She had always taken care of herself, doing what she needed to do to survive. But this was different. This man was offering her something far beyond what she had ever expected, something that could change everything. "Okay," she said finally, her voice small but resolute. "I'll listen. I'll meet with your team." "Great," Jeff replied, his voice warm and reassuring. "We'll set everything up. I'll have someone call you to arrange the details." As the conversation ended, Lola slowly put the phone down, her heart still pounding. She felt a strange mix of emotions: surprise, confusion, hope. Could it be possible that something good was coming her way? But even as she sat there, wondering if this was some kind of dream, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she realized. Why had Jeff Bezos, of all people, taken such an interest in her? Why had he reached out after she had simply helped him with a phone call? Before she could get lost in her thoughts, the phone rang again. She picked it up quickly, almost expecting it to be Jeff's team. But when she heard the voice on the other end, Her stomach dropped. It was Janet, her former boss, and she wasn't calling to apologize. "Lola," Janet said, her voice clipped. "I just got a call from corporate. They want to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions. You didn't just break a company rule. You made a public scene. You let someone like Jeff Bezos use your phone, and we're all going to have to answer for that." Lola's mind spun. Had Jeff Bezos really gone that far to make things right for her? And now this? What was going on? What was she really stepping into? Just then, the phone in her hand slipped, falling to the floor with a loud crash. Her hands were shaking as she stared at the receiver. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but something told her that this was only the beginning. What would Janet do now? And what kind of help was Jeff really offering? Was this a second chance or a trap? Lola could only wait, the silence stretching between her and the unanswered questions. Lola stood motionless, her hand hovering over the phone that had just slipped from her grasp. The room felt unusually quiet, almost suffocating. The air was thick with uncertainty. She bent down to pick it up, but the phone seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. It was as if it held some kind of omen in its cold plastic, something she couldn't quite understand yet. She placed the receiver back into its cradle, feeling a strange sense of dread creep up her spine. The call with Janet had left her rattled. Corporate, a public scene. What was she being dragged into? Her mind kept returning to Jeff Bezos. He had reached out to her, something she never expected in a million years. The more she thought about it, the more her disbelief faded, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude. But then Janet's words rang in her ears, echoing like a harsh reminder of the reality she was now facing. "You made a public scene. You let someone like Jeff Bezos use your phone." The guilt of breaking the rules at the diner still weighed on her, but it didn't seem fair. Was it really such a big deal to help a man who might not have even had access to a simple phone charger? After all, it wasn't like he was asking for a favor that would hurt anyone. It was just a moment of kindness. Lola ran a hand over her face, trying to steady her breathing. She had lived through hard times. She worked through pain, loss, and the struggles that came with being an African-American woman of her generation, often overlooked and underappreciated. But this felt different. The doorbell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitantly, she stood up and walked to the door. When she opened it, there was a young man standing there, holding a small package. He looked like someone who worked in an office, with a neat suit and briefcase in hand. "Are you Lola Davis?" he asked, his voice polite but businesslike. "Yes, that's me," she replied, still puzzled. "Who are you?" "I'm the Mr. Bezos team," he said. "He asked me to come by and deliver something to you personally." Lola's heart skipped a beat. Jeff had sent someone? What on earth could this be about? The man handed her the package, a thick envelope sealed with wax, the Amazon logo embossed on the front. It felt heavier than it should, like it contained more than just papers. She took it from him carefully, still trying to make sense of the situation. "Mr. Bezos will be in touch shortly," the man said before turning to leave, not waiting for a response. Lola stood there for a long moment, staring at the package in her hands. As she closed the door and walked back inside, she noticed her hands were shaking. She took a seat at the kitchen table, the envelope resting in front of her like a mystery she wasn't sure she was ready to solve. What could Jeff Bezos possibly want with her now? Without wasting any more time, Lola opened the envelope. Inside, she found a letter, handwritten in elegant cursive. "Lola, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to personally thank you for your kindness yesterday. You might not realize it, but your simple act of compassion has not only had a profound effect on me, but has also given me a lot to think about in terms of how we treat people, especially those who are often overlooked. In this envelope, you'll find the details of a new opportunity. I want you to meet with my team, but not just to talk about compensation. I'm offering you the chance to be part of something bigger. To start something for yourself, I'm sure you have ideas. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. This is only the beginning. Jeff Bezos." Lola sat back in her chair, her heart thumping. The letter was clear. Jeff wasn't just offering her compensation for losing her job at the diner. He was offering her an opportunity. But what kind of opportunity? What kind of life did he think she wanted to build for herself? She was just an old woman who had spent most of her life serving meals in a small diner. She didn't have grand ambitions, and she didn't know the first thing about running a business or starting something new. She wasn't sure she even wanted to. But Jeff had seen something in her, something she didn't see herself. His words stirred a flicker of hope inside her, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the road for her. Maybe it was the beginning of something entirely different. Just as she was beginning to process everything, her phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but this time, Lola didn't hesitate. She picked up the receiver, her voice trembling with anticipation. "Lola?" Jeff's voice came through clearly, as if he'd been waiting for her. "Yes, Mr. BEZOS," she said, her words steady despite the storm of emotions swirling in her chest. "I know this is a lot to take in," he began, his tone gentle. "But I want to make sure you understand what I'm offering. This isn't about charity. It's about giving you a real chance to make something of yourself. You'd spend your life helping others, Lola. It's time someone helped you, and this is just the beginning. I believe you can do amazing things if you have the right support. That's why I'm offering to invest in whatever you want to create." Lola felt her throat tighten as the reality of his words sank in. He was serious. This wasn't some fleeting gesture. He was offering her a chance to change her life, to create something from scratch. "I don't know what to say," Lola whispered, still trying to process the enormity of the situation. "I never expected anything like this." "I know you didn't," Jeff replied, his voice warm. "But I see something in you, Lola. You've lived a life full of wisdom and strength, and now it's your turn to make a difference." Lola could feel tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of help she had ever imagined, but it was more than she could have ever hoped for. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But just as she was about to speak, there was a knock at the door. Lola hesitated. Who could it be this time? She placed the phone down gently on the table and walked cautiously to the door. When she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Standing in front of her was Janet, her former boss. But this wasn't just a casual visit. Janet's face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Lola," Janet snapped, her voice sharp and accusing. "You've got some explaining to do." Lola's heart raced. What was going on now? Why was Janet here? She tried to keep her voice steady. "Janet, what's going on? Why are you here?" Janet took a deep breath, and in that moment, Lola knew something had changed. Something big was coming. But what? And just like that, the door to her new future, one she had only just begun to imagine, suddenly felt like it was closing. Lola stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing. Janet's face was flushed, her eyes narrowed with a mixture of anger and something Lola couldn't quite place. She had never seen her former boss like this. Not once in all the years they had worked together. "What is it, Janet?" Lola asked, her voice low but steady, trying to mask the anxiety she felt bubbling up in her chest. She glanced down at the package from Jeff Bezos, still on the kitchen table, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if Janet had somehow come to take that away, too. Janet didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crossed her arms and took a step forward, forcing Lola to step back into the hallway. She didn't wait for an invitation. "I've been trying to reach you, Lola," Janet said, her tone sharp. "This isn't just about the phone call anymore. You put us all in a difficult position. I'm here to make sure you understand what this means." Lola blinked, feeling the weight of her former boss's words. "What are you talking about, Janet?" she asked, though a cold knot was already forming in the pit of her stomach. Something didn't feel right. Janet stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Do you know how much trouble you've caused, Lola? The higher-ups are furious. You not only broke the rules by letting that man use your phone, but you also went behind the company's back. You made us look bad." Lola could hardly believe what she was hearing. "I didn't make anyone look bad, Janet. I helped him. He needed a phone, and I gave it to him. It was just a phone call." Janet's face tightened. "It wasn't just a phone call, Lola. You don't get it. Do you know how many people are trying to get close to Jeff Bezos? And here you are, acting like it's no big deal." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Do you have any idea what kind of attention this is bringing?" Lola's heart began to pound in her chest. "What are you saying?" Janet took a breath, her lips curling into something that looked like a smirk. "I'm saying that you've done something that can't be undone. By helping him, you've brought us all into a bigger mess. And I'm not sure if you realize this, but you've made yourself a target." Lola shook her head, trying to process the implications of what Janet was saying. "A target? Why would I be a target?" Janet leaned in closer, lowering her voice even further. "Because people like Bezos don't just forget these things. And when someone like him takes an interest in you, it draws attention. It draws people who want to control things, who want to use you for their own gain, and it won't be long before the vultures start circling. You put a target on your back, Lola, and there's no going back." Lola felt a chill run down her spine. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I know you didn't," Janet said, her tone softening just a bit. "But now you've got to deal with the consequences. The corporate people are watching. They want to see what happens next. You better be careful about who you trust." For a moment, the silence hung heavy between them. Lola felt like she was being pulled in two directions. On one side, there was Jeff Bezos, offering her the chance of a lifetime, a chance to build something new. On the other side, there was Janet, warning her of danger, of forces she couldn't understand, forces that could use her kindness against her. Janet's words echoed in Lola's mind. The vultures are circling. Who were these people Janet was talking about? What did she mean by using her? Before Lola could speak again, Janet turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Lola standing in the doorway. She didn't even look back as she slammed the door behind her, the sound reverberating through the small house. Lola stood there, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had always tried to do the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. But now it seemed like everything was spinning out of control. Helping Jeff Bezos had seemed like the simplest thing in the world, just a small gesture of kindness to a man who needed help. But now it felt like that simple act had opened a door to a world she didn't understand, a world filled with risks and hidden dangers. Lola returned to the kitchen table, sitting down slowly. She glanced at the letter Jeff had sent. It seemed so sincere, so full of promise. But now, with Janet's warning fresh in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. Was Jeff truly trying to help her, or was he part of something much bigger that she didn't fully grasp? She picked up the phone again, this time dialing a number she hadn't called in years, her sister Dolores. Dolores had always been the more cautious one, the one who thought through every decision, the one who had warned her about taking risks in the past. Maybe she could offer some clarity. The phone rang a few times before Dolores picked up. "Hello?" "Dolores," Lola said, her voice trembling. "I need your advice. Something's happening, and I don't know what to make of it." "Tell me what's going on," Dolores replied, her voice instantly concerned. Lola told her everything, from the phone call with Jeff Bezos to the letter, and then the encounter with Janet. She explained the offer Jeff had made, the potential for a new life, a new beginning. And she told Dolores about the warning Janet had given her, the strange feeling that something was amiss. When Lola finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Dolores was thinking, "Lola, I don't want to scare you, but I'm not sure you understand just how big of a situation you're in," Dolores said finally. "Bezos doesn't get involved in things like this without a reason. And when he does, it's never simple. You gotta ask yourself why he's helping you. What does he want from you? And what does this mean for the future?" Lola felt her chest tighten again. She had been hoping for clarity, but now Dolores was only raising more questions. "I don't know," Lola whispered. "I just wanted to do the right thing. I never thought it would turn into all of this." "I know, honey," Dolores said gently, "but you gotta be careful. People like Jeff Bezos don't give things away without wanting something in return. It may not be clear now, but eventually you'll have to decide if you're willing to pay the price." Lola leaned back in her chair, staring at the letter once more. The weight of her sister's words hung over her like a shadow. She wanted to believe in the opportunity Jeff was offering her. She wanted to think that this was a second chance, that this was her time to finally make something of herself. But deep down, she knew that nothing in life came without a cost, and she wasn't sure she was ready to pay it. The phone call with Dolores ended, but Lola's mind continued to race. She needed answers. She needed to know who she could trust and what Jeff's true intentions were. But even as she wondered what her next step should be, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the choices ahead of her were more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. Just then, the phone rang again. It was another unknown number. Her heart skipped. Was it Jeff? Was it someone else with another piece of the puzzle? Lola answered quickly, her hand shaking slightly. "Lola, it's Jeff again." But this time, his voice was different. There was an urgency to it. "Lola, we need to talk. There's something you don't know, and you need to hear it before it's too late." Lola's breath hitched in her chest as she clutched the phone tighter, her heart pounding in her ears. The calm, reassuring tone Jeff Bezos had used before was now replaced by something darker, urgent, almost frantic. She could hear the tension in his voice, the subtle undertone of something important, something serious. "Lola, listen carefully," Jeff said, his voice low and steady, though she could tell he was trying to control his emotions. "There's a lot I haven't told you, and I need to be completely transparent with you now. This isn't just about giving you a second chance or making things right. There's more at stake here, and you're in the middle of it." Lola felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had known deep down that things weren't as simple as they appeared, but hearing it from Jeff himself felt like a punch to the gut. She had been hoping for clarity, for reassurance that this opportunity was real, that it was something good. But now, his words were pulling her into something she wasn't sure she was ready for. "What do you mean?" Lola asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on, Jeff?" He sighed, the sound heavy on the other end of the line. "You remember when I said that helping me with that phone call meant more than you realized? Well, that phone call wasn't just to discuss a business matter. It was about something far bigger, a deal that's been in the works for months. I can't go into all the details just yet, but I'll tell you this. Your action yesterday didn't just help me. It set something in motion that you're now a part of, and it's not something that can be undone." Lola's mind spun. The phone call, the offer, everything had seemed so innocent at first. She had just helped a man in need. But now she was learning that the consequences of that decision were far-reaching. She felt herself growing more anxious, more uncertain with every word Jeff spoke. "What are you saying, Jeff?" Lola asked, barely able to keep the fear from her voice. "What's going to happen?" Jeff hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much he should reveal. "Lola, I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. There are people who are watching, people who are paying attention to what happened yesterday, and some of them are not people you want to cross." Lola swallowed hard. She could feel her pulse quicken, her anxiety building. She had never imagined that helping someone with a simple phone call could have such far-reaching consequences. But now it was clear that Jeff's world was far more complicated than she had realized. "Who are these people?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do they want with me?" Jeff was quiet for a long moment, and Lola could almost hear him weighing his next words carefully. "I can't give you all the answers right now," he said finally, his voice quieter. "But I'll tell you this. You become part of something bigger than either of us. And there are people out there who want to use that against you. They want to control you, manipulate you into playing their game. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure they get what they want." Lola's mind raced, but she couldn't keep up. "What game? I'm just a waitress. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Jeff said, his tone softening. "But you were in the right place at the right time. And because of that, you're now involved in a bigger game. People like me, we make decisions that affect thousands, sometimes millions of lives. And in your case, Lola, your decision to help me, it's put you on the radar of some very powerful people." The weight of Jeff's words settled on Lola like a thick blanket. She had never been a part of anything like this. She had always lived her life quietly, in the background, never asking for more than what she needed to get by. But now, she was in the middle of something far beyond her understanding. "I don't want any part of this," Lola said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to help someone who needed it." "I know you did," Jeff replied quickly. "And that's why I'm trying to help you. I want to give you the resources to protect yourself, to make sure you're safe. But you need to trust me, Lola. There's no turning back now." Lola's stomach twisted with unease. She wanted to trust Jeff. He had been kind to her, offering her a chance at something more than she could have ever dreamed. But now, with his words weighing heavily on her, she wasn't so sure. Was this a trap? Had she been swept into something that was beyond her control? "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to stay alert, Lola," Jeff said. "I need you to trust your instincts and keep your eyes open. You're going to start seeing things differently now. People will start acting strange around you. There are those who want to manipulate you, to pull you into their world for their own gain. But you can't let that happen." Lola felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know if I can do this, Jeff. I'm just an old woman. I don't know how to play these kinds of games." "You don't have to play any games," Jeff reassured her. "Just stay true to who you are. Help people when you can, trust your gut, and don't let anyone take advantage of you. And remember, you're not alone in this. I'll be watching out for you." Lola didn't know what to think anymore. She had gone from a simple act of kindness to being caught up in something far bigger than she could ever have imagined. She had always kept a low profile, never attracting attention, but now it seemed that attention was coming for her whether she wanted it or not. She placed the phone down slowly, her mind in a fog. She couldn't help but feel like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. But there was no turning back now. Jeff had made it clear that she was already in the middle of something much bigger than herself, and whether she was ready for it or not, the game had already begun. Lola looked down at the letter from Jeff once more, her hands trembling slightly. There was still so much she didn't understand, so many unanswered questions. What did he mean by people watching? Who were these powerful people he had spoken of? And what did they want from her? Just as she was beginning to gather her thoughts, the doorbell rang again, this time louder and more insistent. Her heart skipped a beat. She opened the door cautiously, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, with a briefcase in hand, was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and his expression was unreadable. "Lola Davis?" he asked, his voice cold and businesslike. "Yes?" Lola answered, her stomach sinking. She had a feeling she already knew what was coming. "We need to talk," the man said flatly, "and we need to talk now." Lola's heart raced. Who was this man? What did he want with her? And why did it feel like everything was closing in on her all at once? Before she could speak, the man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence between them was thick with tension, and Lola realized that this was no ordinary visit. Something was happening, and it was happening faster than she could keep up with. "Let's go inside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We don't have much time." Lola's heart pounded as the man stepped into her home without waiting for an invitation. She had no idea who he was, but there was something in his cold, controlled demeanor that sent a chill down her spine. His sharp, calculating eyes seemed to take in every detail of her small, modest home, and his presence felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. "Who are you?" Lola asked, her voice shaking. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the overwhelming pressure of uncertainty threatening to swallow her whole. The man didn't immediately answer. Instead, he glanced at the package from Jeff Bezos on the kitchen table, then back at her. It was clear he knew who she was, and he had been waiting for this moment. "Lola Davis," he repeated, his tone unfeeling. "You've made quite an impression. I need you to come with me. There's a lot you need to understand." Lola took a step back, her mind spinning. "I don't know who you are, but I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm not involved in anything shady. You've got the wrong person." The man's lips curled into a thin smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He took a step closer, his movements deliberate. "I don't think you understand the situation, Lola. You're already involved. You've been involved since the moment you helped Jeff Bezos, and now we need to make sure you're not going to make things worse." Lola's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? What does Jeff Bezos have to do with any of this?" The man's smile faded. "Let's just say Mr. Bezos is a very connected person. And sometimes, when people like him make decisions, it sets off a chain of events. You've been caught in that chain, Lola. You don't have the luxury of sitting this one out." She backed away, her mind racing. What kind of game was this? She had only done a small favor for Jeff. Now it seemed like that one simple act had escalated into something far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "I don't want any part of this," Lola said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've worked my whole life to stay out of trouble. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to be dragged into something that isn't my fault." The man ignored her protest and walked toward the kitchen table, picking up the letter from Jeff Bezos without asking. He opened it slowly, reading the words with an almost detached curiosity. When he was done, he glanced back at Lola. "This is just the beginning, Lola," he said coldly, "and you're going to have to decide which side you're on. You're no longer just a waitress in a diner. You've become part of something much bigger, whether you like it or not." Lola felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Her legs felt weak, and she had to steady herself against the back of the chair. Her mind was swimming, her thoughts fragmented and unclear. All she had wanted was to live a quiet life, to help someone in need without expecting anything in return. But now, it seemed like she had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, one where powerful people, hidden forces, and unseen hands were manipulating the course of her life. "I don't know what you want from me," Lola said, her voice trembling. "But I'm not your pawn. I'm not anyone's pawn." The man's expression softened, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't have a choice," he replied. "You've already made your move. Now you need to learn how to play the game." Lola's mind raced, but before she could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. It was loud, insistent, like the world outside was closing in on her. The man didn't seem surprised. In fact, he barely reacted. He just walked toward the door and opened it without asking. Standing on the doorstep was another figure, a woman tall, with striking features and a professional air. She was dressed in a sleek black suit, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, her expression unreadable. "Is everything set?" the woman asked, her voice smooth but commanding. The man nodded, then turned to Lola. "This is Murad," he said. "She's the one who's going to help you understand what's at stake here." Lola stood frozen, unable to speak. Murad stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning Lola with an almost predatory interest. Jeff Bezos isn't the only one who's been watching you, Lola, Morris said, her voice calm but filled with an unsettling confidence. There are others who are just as interested in what you can do, what you can offer. Lola shook her head, trying to process the whirlwind of information that was coming at her. "I'm just an old woman," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have anything to offer." Morris smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. "You'd be surprised," she said softly. "You already offered something that no one else could, and now we need to make sure you don't make the wrong choices moving forward." Lola took a deep breath, her mind reeling. She wanted to ask so many questions. What was going on? Why were these people here? What did Jeff have to do with any of this? But she could sense that asking the wrong questions now would only make things worse. The more she tried to make sense of it all, the more confusing it became. "Where are you taking me?" Lola asked finally, her voice firm, though her hands still shook slightly. "What do you want with me?" Mora exchanged a look with the man who had yet to introduce himself. Then she turned back to Lola, her expression unreadable. "We're not going to hurt you," Lola, Mora said, her tone almost kind. "But you need to understand something. This is bigger than you or me. It's about power. It's about control. And now, you're part of it." Lola's heart raced. She felt like she was caught in a whirlwind, pulled in different directions by forces she couldn't see or understand. She had always lived a quiet, simple life, but now it seemed like the world had been turned upside down, and she had no idea how to get her bearings. The man motioned for Lola to follow them. "It's time for you to learn what you've gotten yourself into." Lola hesitated, her mind still whirling. But then, with a final glance at the small, quiet life she had built for herself, at the kitchen table, the letter from Jeff Bezos, the phone that had started it all, she realized she had no choice. She was already in the game. And the only way out was to play. Slowly, with a heavy heart, Lola followed the man and Mora out of her home and into the unknown. Lola's steps were slow as she walked through the front door, her feet feeling heavier with each stride. It was as if the gravity of the situation had doubled, and every step away from her home felt like she was stepping further into a world she couldn't comprehend. The man and Mora led the way, their pace brisk, their demeanor cold and businesslike. Lola wanted to ask questions, but she knew now wasn't the time. Every part of her screamed to turn back, to retreat into the comfort of her small, familiar home. But the presence of these strangers, their authority, the way they seemed to control the space around them, left her feeling powerless. They reached a sleek black SUV parked outside. Mara opened the door and gestured for Lola to get in. Without a word, the man climbed into the front seat and Mara followed suit, sitting next to Lola in the back. As the vehicle pulled away from her house, Lola looked out the window, watching the neighborhood fade into the distance. It was a quiet neighborhood, where nothing ever really changed. And now, as her life was about to be dragged into a world she didn't understand, that quiet, predictable life felt like a lifetime ago. "Lola," Mora said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that made Lola uneasy. "You need to listen carefully to everything we say. This isn't just about you helping Jeff Bezos anymore. There's a bigger picture here, and you need to be aware of what's at stake." Lola swallowed, her mind racing. "What's at stake? I don't understand. All I did was help a man with a phone call. Why is this such a big deal?" Mara glanced at her, her lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. "You don't realize it, but that simple phone call has put you at the center of something much larger. Something that involves a lot of very powerful people who don't take kindly to being caught off guard. And you've caught their attention." Lola shook her head, feeling a wave of confusion wash over her. "But I didn't do anything wrong. I just—" "You didn't do anything wrong," Mara interrupted, her tone softening slightly. "But sometimes, doing the right thing at the wrong time can have consequences you're not prepared for. You've stepped into a world where people make moves for reasons you may never fully understand. And now, you're part of those moves." Lola couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always prided herself on being a good person, on doing the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. But now it felt like all of that had led her down a path where there was no going back. The weight of what Mora was saying was beginning to settle in. "What do you want me to do?" Lola asked, her voice trembling. "I don't want any part of whatever this is. I don't want to be involved in this mess." Mora didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the window, as though considering Lola's words carefully. The silence in the car felt suffocating. The only sound was the hum of the engine as the vehicle sped through the streets, leaving Lola's old life behind. Finally, Mara spoke again. I know you don't want to be involved, Lola. But the truth is, you already are. And there's no walking away from it now. You've been marked. People are watching you, and there are forces at play that you can't even begin to understand. Lola felt a cold chill run through her. Marked? By who? Who are these people? Mora's eyes shifted to meet Lola's, and for the first time, Lola saw something flicker behind them. A brief flash of something almost human. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold, calculating look she had seen since they arrived. There are a lot of powerful players in this game, Lola, Mara said quietly. People who are far above Jeff Bezos, people whose names you would never even know. They operate in the shadows, making decisions that affect millions without anyone ever knowing their faces. And they don't like things to go off script. Lola's mind raced. What does any of this have to do with me? I'm just a waitress. I don't know these people. I don't want to know them. Mara sighed and leaned back in her seat, her expression softening for a moment. I understand, Lola, but sometimes people like you get caught in the crossfire. Sometimes it's not about who you know or what you've done. It's not the things you've seen, the things you've unknowingly touched. Lola was silent for a long moment, trying to process the gravity of Mara's words. She felt as if she was being pulled in a dozen different directions, each one more confusing and dangerous than the last. The car made a sharp turn, and the building Lola had been dreading finally came into view. It was a sleek, modern structure, far removed from the familiar streets of her neighborhood. This wasn't just a building, it was a fortress, a place that looked like it had been designed to keep the outside world at bay. The windows were dark, and the walls seemed to swallow any light that tried to reach them. Mara didn't say anything as the car pulled into the underground parking lot. The man in the front seat got out without a word, and Mara followed. Lola, feeling like a lamb led to slaughter, hesitated for a moment before she stepped out of the car as well. They entered the building through a private elevator, and Lola couldn't help but feel like she was descending into some kind of secret world. Every inch of the building was pristine, too pristine. The air felt thick, heavy with the sense of power, as though the walls themselves were watching her. They reached the top floor, and the elevator doors slid open to reveal a long hallway, lined with high-end offices. At the end of the hall was a large, imposing door. The man stopped in front of it, turning to Lola. This is it, he said, his voice detached. Go in, and be careful what you say. This is where the real decisions are made. Lola's pulse quickened. She wanted to turn around, to leave to go back to her quiet little life. But the door had already been opened, and there was no turning back now. Mara gave her a small, almost apologetic look before walking into the room. Lola followed, feeling the weight of her decision settle in with each step. Inside, the room was like nothing she had ever seen. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with thick volumes and papers, and a large desk sat at the center. Behind it was a man in his late 40s, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. His hair was dark, streaked with silver at the temples, and his sharp eyes were fixed on Lola the moment she walked in. Ah, Lola Davis, the man said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. The woman who changed everything with one simple gesture. You're more important than you realize. Lola froze, unsure of what to say. This man, this stranger, knew everything about her, knew what she had done, and now she was standing in front of him like a puppet on a string. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, a cold, knowing smile. I want you to understand something, Lola. You've been given a unique position, a chance to be part of something larger, but you need to make a choice now. Do you want to be a pawn in someone else's game, or do you want to take control of your own destiny? Lola's mind swirled with confusion, fear, and a desperate desire for escape. She didn't know what this man wanted from her, but one thing was clear. She was no longer in control of her life, and the game was just beginning. Lola's heart raced in her chest as she stood before the man, unable to move or speak. His cold smile only seemed to grow wider, like a predator watching its prey, waiting for her to make the first move. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the situation pressing down on her with every passing second. For a long moment, the man behind the desk didn't say anything. He simply watched her, his eyes sharp and calculating, as though he were trying to read her every thought. It was unnerving, and Lola felt the urge to shrink back, to escape from the room, from the whole twisted scenario that had unfolded since the moment she helped Jeff Bezos with that simple phone call. Well? The man's voice broke the silence, and Lola flinched. What do you choose, Lola? You may think you're powerless in this situation, but let me assure you, you're not. You hold more value than you realize, and now you need to decide. Will you be part of something greater, something that could change everything? Or will you fade into obscurity, like everyone else who hasn't made the right choice? Lola took a shaky breath, her hands clammy as she gripped the edge of the chair in front of her. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just a waitress. I didn't ask for any of this. I don't even understand why I'm here. The man leaned forward in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. His gaze was steady, unwavering. You don't need to understand everything, Lola. You simply need to make a choice. You helped Jeff Bezos, and in doing so, you've opened a door that was never meant to be opened. Now you're standing at the threshold of something much bigger. A network of powerful people, decisions being made that affect nations, economies, futures. Your role in this, however small it may seem, has put you on a path from which there is no return. Lola's stomach twisted in knots. She didn't want any of this. She didn't want to be part of some secret power game. She had been content in her small world, her little diner, her quiet life. Now it felt like all of that was slipping away, replaced by something dark and dangerous. The thought of becoming part of this network terrified her, but at the same time, a strange curiosity gnawed at her, pushing her to ask the questions she hadn't dared ask before. Why me? She blurted out, her voice trembling. Why did you come to me? I'm just an old woman who works in a diner. Why do you need me? The man's lips curled into a slow smile, but it was devoid of any real warmth. Because you're more than just a waitress, Lola. You're someone who has the ability to influence, even without realizing it. You've already shown that, haven't you? The world is full of people who think they have no power, until they're in the right place at the right time. That's what you were for Jeff Bezos, and that's what you can be for us. Lola blinked, her mind struggling to process his words. Influence, It felt like a dream, a nightmare, a mix of things she couldn't quite grasp. How could she possibly have influence? She was just a woman who took orders and served coffee. There had to be a mistake. There had to be. The man continued, not waiting for her to digest what he'd said. You're not just a pawn, Lola. But if you don't play your cards right, you could end up being just that. A pawn in a game with much higher stakes than you could ever imagine. Her pulse quickened as she realized the weight of what he was saying. He wasn't asking her to be part of something small. He was asking her to step into a world of power, influence, and manipulation, a world where one wrong move could cost everything. But how could she navigate such a world when she had no idea how to even play? I can't do this, Lola said, shaking her head. I don't know how to be a part of all this. I just want to go home. I just want to go back to my life. The man's smile faded, replaced by a more serious, almost somber expression. That's the thing about power, Lola. You don't get to choose when it comes knocking. Once you're in, there's no going back. There are people who need you, who expect you to step up. And if you don't, someone else will take your place. Lola felt the weight of his words sink in, deep into her bones. There was no escape. She was already in this world, whether she liked it or not. But she couldn't just accept it. She couldn't just go along with something she didn't understand, something that seemed so far beyond anything she had ever known. I don't want to hurt anyone, Lola said, her voice trembling. I just wanted to help Jeff. I never asked for this. The man stood from his desk and walked toward her, his footsteps measured and deliberate. He was so close now she could feel his presence in the air, like a storm waiting to break. You won't be hurting anyone, he said quietly, his voice no longer cold but almost sympathetic. You'll be helping people, Lola. People who know what needs to be done. People who are already making decisions for the greater good of the world. Lola took a step back, her head spinning. The greater good? She asked, barely able to hold the thought together. What does that even mean? Who decides what's good? The man's eyes softened for the briefest of moments, as if he were considering her words. But the next moment, his expression hardened again. That's not your concern. Your job is to understand that your actions, no matter how small, have consequences. The people who are watching you, they understand that. And they want to make sure you're a part of the right side. The side that moves the world forward. Lola felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always believed in doing the right thing, in helping where she could. But this didn't feel like something she could do. This wasn't about helping people anymore. This was about power, control, and decisions she couldn't even begin to comprehend. What do you want from me? Lola asked again, this time with more force. What do you expect me to do? The man smiled again, but this time it was different, less calculating and more welcoming. We want you to choose, Lola. To understand that you have a role to play in the world of power, whether you want it or not. You don't have to be a puppet. You don't have to play by the rules of others. You can choose to be part of the system, or you can fight it. But make no mistake, once you've seen what's behind the curtain, there's no one seeing it. Lola took a shaky breath. She felt like a chess piece being moved across the board, with no idea where she was going or how to fight the inevitable. "But I'm just a waitress," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes softened again, and for the first time, Lola saw a hint of something else in his gaze. "Sometimes, Lola, it's the ones who think they have no power who change everything." And just like that, Lola realized she was caught. There was no way out. This was the world now, and whether she was ready or not, it was time to play. He motioned toward the door. "We'll give you time to think about it, but understand this. Time is something you don't have much of. The clock is ticking, and your move will determine what happens next." Lola stood there, frozen, as the man walked out of the room, followed by Mora. The door closed softly behind them, and for a long moment, Lola stood alone in the vast empty room. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her place in the world, was now in question. She had been a small piece in a much bigger puzzle, and now she had to decide whether to keep playing or risk everything. The choice was hers, and she had no idea what would happen if she chose wrong. Lola stood alone in the sterile, empty room, the echoes of the man's words still ringing in her ears. Her hands trembled as she wiped them against her jeans, her mind a whirl of confusion and fear. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her in a space that felt far more like a trap than a sanctuary. Time was running out. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had always been a woman of routine, quiet, simple, and predictable. She had never once imagined that she'd be thrust into a world of shadowy decisions, power plays, and unseen forces. But now she was here, and there was no going back. Her thoughts bounced between disbelief and anger. How could she have let herself get pulled into something so dark, so far beyond her comprehension? All she had done was help someone. A simple favor for Jeff Bezos. She hadn't known the consequences, hadn't understood the forces at play, and now it felt like she was stuck in a game where the rules didn't make sense and the stakes were higher than she could imagine. A knock on the door startled her, making her jump. It was soft, tentative, but it made her pulse race. "Come in," Lola called, her voice strained. The door creaked open, and Mara entered the room, her footsteps silent as she crossed to the center of the room. She was holding a tablet, her expression unreadable. There was something about her that unsettled Lola, a coldness that didn't belong to someone who claimed to be helping her. "How are you feeling?" Mara asked, her voice smooth, yet with an edge that made Lola uneasy. She didn't seem to care about the turmoil Lola was feeling. To Mara, this was all just part of the process, a necessary step in a much bigger plan. Lola didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure how to respond. She was feeling a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, frustration. But there was something else too. Fear, deep gnawing fear. She had no idea what to do next, no idea what she was supposed to be thinking or feeling. "I'm not sure what to feel," Lola finally said. "I don't even know what's happening anymore." Mara nodded, her eyes glinting with something that almost resembled sympathy. "It's a lot to take in, I understand. But it's important that you understand this. You've been given an opportunity, Lola. An opportunity to be part of something that most people only dream of. People like you, people who have a unique position, are rare. And the people behind this organization, they're watching you. They want to know if you're ready to take the next step." Lola's mind raced as she processed Mora's words. An opportunity. She didn't want an opportunity. She didn't want to be part of any secret organization or shadowy dealings. She just wanted to go home. To her little diner. To her life. "I never asked for this," Lola said, her voice cracking. "I never wanted any of this." Mora's gaze softened, though it wasn't with warmth. It was more like an understanding of someone who had seen it all before. "I know you didn't ask for it, Lola. But that's how it works sometimes. Life doesn't always give us what we want. It gives us what we need. And right now, you need to make a decision. The world you've entered is far more dangerous than you realize. There are people who want to use you. People who want to control you. And there are others who want to see you succeed. The question is, which side will you choose?" Lola shook her head, her thoughts swirling. "I don't want to be part of any side. I just want my life back." Mora's expression hardened slightly. "You can't go back, Lola. That door is closed now. The moment you helped Jeff Bezos, you opened a door to a world you can't walk away from. You may not understand it yet, but you've already made your choice. You just don't realize it. Lola's chest tightened. No, I didn't make any choice. I didn't know what I was getting into. You're asking me to choose between things I don't even know exist. I don't even know who these people are. What am I supposed to do? What if I make the wrong choice? Maura didn't flinch. Instead, she placed the tablet down on the desk, her gaze never leaving Lola. There's no such thing as the wrong choice, Lola. There are only consequences. You either adapt to this world or it crushes you. But I'm here to make sure it doesn't crush you. Lola felt a surge of anger, but she held it in. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. She couldn't afford to let her emotions take over. This was bigger than her, bigger than anything she could have ever imagined. But the idea of being controlled, of being forced into a decision she didn't understand, made her blood boil. I don't know what you want from me, Lola whispered, her voice hoarse. I'm just a waitress. I don't have any special talents or connections. I don't have anything to offer you. I don't even know why I'm here. Maura's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. That's where you're wrong, Lola. You do have something to offer. You've always had something. You just don't know it yet. And that's why we're here, to help you understand your place in all of this. Lola looked at her, confused. What do you mean? What is it that I have? I don't even know what's going on. Maura stepped closer, her voice lowering, almost as if she were letting Lola in on a secret. You've already seen a part of the bigger picture, Lola. You've touched a thread in a tapestry that stretches farther than you can imagine. The moment you helped Jeff Bezos, he became part of a much larger game. And the truth is, you've been chosen. Chosen because you have the ability to move things. You've always had the ability to influence, even if you didn't know it. The people behind this, the ones pulling the strings, they saw something in you. Something that made you stand out. And that's why you're here. Lola's mind reeled. This wasn't making any sense. How could she, just an ordinary 91-year-old waitress, have any kind of influence on such a massive scale? How could she possibly be part of this world? I don't understand, Lola said, her voice breaking. I'm just an old woman. I can't be part of something like this. Maura's gaze softened, but only for a moment. You're not just an old woman, Lola. You're someone who has a rare opportunity to change the course of things. But you have to be willing to see it. You have to stop thinking of yourself as small, insignificant. You've already made waves, whether you know it or not. You can either embrace that power or let it consume you. Lola's breath caught in her throat. Power, influence. She had never thought of herself that way. She had always just done what she could, lived her life as best as she could. But now it felt like everything had changed. She was no longer just Lola Davis, the woman who had worked at a diner. She was a piece on a board, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. How do I even begin to understand this? Lola asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do I make a choice when I don't even know what I'm choosing? Maura smiled again, but this time it was different. It wasn't cold or calculating. It was something else, almost encouraging. That's why we're here, Lola. To help you see the bigger picture. You don't have to make the choice alone. You have us. And once you understand, once you see the true scope of what's at stake, you'll know exactly what to do. The weight of her words sank into Lola's chest. There was no turning back. This was her life now. She could either embrace the game, try to carve out her place, or she could fight against forces far beyond her understanding. But the choice, whatever it was, had to be made soon. Lola took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what would happen next. But one thing was certain, the world she had known was gone, and what came next could change everything. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she had to be. Lola spent the next few days in a fog, her mind swirling with Maura's words. The walls of the small, nondescript hotel room seemed to close in on her, trapping her in a place between confusion and disbelief. She couldn't shake the feeling that the world she had always known had vanished, replaced by something dark and unfamiliar. Every time she closed her eyes, the man's cold smile, the weight of his words, and the strange promises of power and influence played over in her mind like a broken record. She felt lost, and worst of all, she felt alone. The days were a blur, one indistinguishable from the other. Each morning, she would wake up, try to eat a little, maybe take a walk outside, and then return to the sterile, impersonal hotel room. No windows, no warmth, just the hum of the air conditioning and the constant reminder that her life had somehow spiraled out of her control. But the silence, oh, the silence, was the hardest part. Not a single person she knew had tried to contact her. Her phone had gone silent the moment she had been taken to this place. No calls from her friends at the diner. No check-ins from the few people who still cared. It was as if her life before this moment had been erased, wiped clean by forces she couldn't see or understand. It was on the third night that Mara came back to see her, stepping into the room with that same confident, almost predatory air. Her expression was calm, but there was something in her eyes that suggested Lola had run out of time to make a decision. "You've been quiet," Mara remarked, sitting down across from Lola at the small desk. She didn't look at the room, at the small bed in the corner or the cheap curtains that didn't let in enough light. Her focus was entirely on Lola. "Have you made your choice?" Lola shook her head slowly, feeling the weight of the question pressing down on her chest. She hadn't made a choice, not because she didn't want to, but because she had no idea what choice even meant anymore. How could she choose between something she didn't understand? How could she be sure that what Mara and the others were offering was the right path? "I don't know what I'm supposed to choose," Lola said, her voice strained. "I don't even know what any of this means. You keep saying I have power, but I don't see it. All I know is that I'm scared. I don't want to be part of something I don't understand." Mara leaned forward slightly, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Her gaze softened, just a little, as if she was trying to understand Lola's hesitancy. "That's the problem with people like you, Lola. You've been taught to think small, to think that you have no control. But that's a lie. You've always had control. It's just been hidden from you, kept from you. People like Jeff Bezos, the ones who run this world, they don't have any more power than you do. They just know how to use it. And you're learning. That's what this is about. The choice isn't about understanding or knowing. It's about trusting yourself, trusting your ability to act when the time comes." Lola's brow furrowed in confusion. "But what if I don't want to act? What if I don't want any part of this? What happens then?" Mara smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was knowing, even pitying. "You'll be left behind, Lola. If you don't make a choice, someone else will. And when that happens, you won't just be irrelevant. You'll be in their way. It's simple, really. No one gets to sit on the sidelines. The world doesn't work that way." Lola's heart sank. She had always thought of herself as a small part of a larger world, someone who wasn't meant for the limelight, someone whose life didn't have consequences beyond the small town she had lived in. But now, Mara's words felt like a hard slap across the face. She was part of something bigger. Whether she liked it or not, she was involved, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Lola whispered, the fear she had tried to suppress seeping through her voice. "I don't want to be part of something that's going to hurt people." Mara's gaze hardened, though there was no malice in it. Just the cold truth of someone who had been part of this world for far too long to care about things like hurt or right or wrong. "No one said anything about hurting people, Lola. What you're talking about is weakness. You think you can change the world without stepping on a few toes? No. The world moves on whether you want it to or not. The question is, will you be part of it, or will you stand in the way?" The words hum in the air, thick with the promise of something far beyond Lola's understanding. She had never been good with decisions, never liked confrontation. She had always been content with her quiet life. But now, the decision had been thrust upon her, an impossible choice that had consequences she couldn't begin to fathom. She closed her eyes, trying to find some clarity in the storm of her emotions. Her hands were clammy, her chest tight with anxiety. She couldn't stop thinking about the diner, the small town she had left behind, the life she'd known. But then she thought of Jeff Bezos, the phone call that had started this mess, the way he had looked at her when he thanked her. It was as if he knew something important that she didn't. "You have something special, Lola," Mara's voice cut through her thoughts. "You just don't know it yet, but we'll help you figure it out. All you have to do is trust us." Lola opened her eyes, staring at Mara's calculating expression. Trust them? Could she trust them? Could she trust anyone in this strange new world? She had been thrown into this situation without any warning, without any explanation. But there was one thing that was clear. She couldn't run away. She was already in too deep. "Okay," Lola said, her voice soft but firm. "I'll do it. I'll make a choice. But I need to understand more. I need to know what this is all really about. What's the point of all this power? Why do you need me?" Mara's lips curled into a smile, one that seemed to hold a secret Lola wasn't quite ready to understand. "You'll learn everything in time, but for now, you just need to accept that the power is yours to wield. You don't have to understand everything yet, but you'll get there, and when you do, you'll be unstoppable." Lola stared at her for a long moment, her mind racing with possibilities, with doubts, and with the fear that she was being led down a path she couldn't turn back from. But despite her fear, despite everything inside her screaming that she wasn't cut out for this, she nodded. "Okay," she repeated, almost to herself. "I'll trust you." Mara stood up, her expression softening just a little. "Good. I knew you'd come around." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at Lola. "You made the right choice, but remember, Lola, there's no going back now." And with that, she left, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Lola standing alone once again. But this time, something inside her felt different. Something had shifted. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew one thing for certain. The path she was about to walk would change everything, whether she was ready or not. And deep down, Lola wondered if there was even any turning back anymore. The days that followed were unlike any Lola had ever experienced. The quiet life she had lived for so many years felt like a distant memory. The pressure of what was happening, what was about to happen, pressed down on her. And no matter how hard she tried to grasp the pieces of normalcy she had once taken for granted, they slipped through her fingers like sand. Mara's words echoed in her mind. There's no going back. And with each passing day, Lola found herself believing it more and more. She had crossed a line she didn't even know existed until she had stepped over it. Now there was no way to reverse her actions, no way to return to the comfort of the life she had known before she met Jeff Bezos. The next morning, after Mara's visit, Lola was escorted to a new location. This time, it wasn't a hotel room. It wasn't even the kind of place Lola had ever imagined herself visiting. They drove her to a sleek, modern building that stood tall and imposing against the gray sky. The glass walls reflected the world around it, but Lola felt small, as if the very structure itself was towering over her, watching her every move. Inside, the atmosphere was stark, cold, sterile, and unnervingly quiet. Everything was pristine, organized, and impersonal. She was taken through long hallways, each turn colder than the last, until they arrived at a small office at the end of a hallway. It was barely furnished, with just a single chair and a desk. Behind the desk sat a man Lola had never met before, but his presence was almost suffocating. He didn't introduce himself, and neither did the two men who accompanied her. They didn't need to. This place didn't operate like a normal office. It operated like a machine, efficient and precise, where introductions weren't necessary. It was clear that this was no ordinary meeting. "Sit," the man behind the desk commanded in a low, clipped tone. Lola hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair. She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this meeting, was something far more important than anything she had faced so far. The room was unnervingly silent, save for the low hum of the fluorescent lights above them. The man slid a folder across the desk. The edges of the folder were sharp, crisp, like everything in this place. His fingers moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if he was waiting for Lola to make a move. She didn't touch it immediately, unsure of what it contained. It was one of those moments where the consequences of her actions were real and tangible, and she was left to wonder what would happen next. "Everything you need is in there," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "We don't have time for small talk. Read it, sign it, and then we'll move forward." Lola's stomach tightened. There was no way out now. She could feel the weight of the decision that had been placed in her hands. This was it. No more running. No more questions, just action. She reached for the folder and opened it, scanning the pages quickly. Each document seemed to be filled with legal jargon and terms she didn't understand. But there was one line that stood out, a simple statement that sent a chill down her spine. "You are now officially a member of the initiative." The words sent a shock through her system. The initiative. That was what Mara had mentioned. The secret group. The people who controlled things from the shadows. The ones who had pulled her into this world in the first place. Lola had never asked for any of this, but here she was, a part of it. Her name was already written in the official records. She had been folded into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Her hand shook as she turned the pages, her mind racing. Each document outlined a different part of her new life. There were rules, expectations, a code of conduct she was to follow. But there was no mention of why any of this was happening. There was no explanation of what the initiative actually did, no understanding of what they were building, no answers to the questions that kept swirling in her head. But there was something else, something she didn't expect. A note on the last page caught her eye. It wasn't written in formal language like the rest of the documents. It was more personal, more direct. "Your first task will be to report to Jeff Bezos. He is waiting for you at the scheduled meeting time." Lola's heart skipped a beat. Jeff Bezos. He was a part of this. She had known, on some level, that he had been involved. But the fact that she was now being asked to meet with him directly, She had no idea what that would mean. She had helped him once, but now it seemed like there was something more to their connection. Something that was drawing her deeper into a world she didn't fully understand. She looked up at the man behind the desk. What does all of this mean? Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to steady herself. The man didn't answer immediately. He simply watched her, his gaze impassive. You'll understand soon enough. The question now is whether you're ready to step into the role you've been given. The time to ask questions is over. It's time to act. Lola felt a cold wave wash over her. There was no turning back now. Her future was no longer hers to control. She had signed the papers, she had agreed to whatever deal the initiative had struck for her, and now she was about to meet Jeff Bezos again. Only this time, it would be different. This time, she wouldn't be just a waitress helping a rich man. She would be a part of something much, much bigger. Your meeting is in 1 hour, the man behind the desk continued, his tone flat. Get prepared. You'll be taken to the location shortly. Lola nodded silently, her throat tight. She didn't know what to expect from the meeting with Jeff Bezos. She didn't know what this world wanted from her, but one thing was certain, her life was no longer her own. When they left the room, she was escorted out of the building and into a sleek black car waiting outside. The drive felt interminable, the city passing by in a blur as her thoughts consumed her. She didn't know where they were taking her, but the name Jeff Bezos loomed large in her mind. She thought about the man, the billionaire she had helped without understanding the full scope of what she was doing. She had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, but now she was about to find out. The car finally stopped in front of a building that looked like it could have been pulled straight out of a corporate spy movie. Tall, glass, and imposing. Security guards stood at attention, watching her as she stepped out of the car. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't the diner. This wasn't the life she knew. This was the world of people who could reshape everything, who could change the rules and make others play by their own. And in just a few moments, she was going to meet one of them. Lola's mind raced with questions she could never fully answer. Was she ready for this? Could she handle it? What did Jeff Bezos want from her now? She didn't have the answers, but as she walked toward the entrance of the building, her legs trembling beneath her, she knew one thing. The meeting was about to change everything. And she wasn't sure she was ready to face whatever came next. The doors to the building opened with a soft whoosh, the sleek polished glass sliding effortlessly apart. Lola stepped into the lobby, and the chill of the air conditioning hit her instantly, sharper than it had been in the car. She tried to steady her breathing, though it felt like her chest was constricting with every step. This was it. She was about to face Jeff Bezos, the man whose name carried so much weight, whose decisions shaped industries and changed the course of history. And here she was, just a small-town waitress, about to enter his world. The security guards in the lobby stood at attention, giving her curt nods as she passed. No smiles, no warmth, just business. The silence was almost oppressive, the polished floors reflecting the overhead lights in a way that made the place feel even colder, more distant. There was no welcome, no comfort. She followed the guard through a maze of hallways, each one leading to a door that looked just like the last, gray, unremarkable, but filled with the promise of something big, something important. Every door she passed felt like another layer of the world she was being drawn into, a world she hadn't asked for, but was now a part of. They arrived at a large, imposing office. The door was heavier than it looked, and when the guard opened it, Lola was hit by a wave of warmth, the contrast almost shocking after the cold of the hallways. The room inside was nothing like the sterile corporate environment of the rest of the building. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with books and artifacts that seemed to tell stories of success, power, and knowledge. A large desk sat in the center of the room, surrounded by plush chairs, and behind the desk was the man she had been sent to meet, Jeff Bezos. He was exactly as she had imagined him, calm, collected, and commanding. But there was something in his eyes that made Lola feel like she was standing before a force of nature. He didn't smile when she entered, but his gaze was steady, unwavering. He didn't seem to care that she was nervous or unsure. He just was, and that presence was more than enough. "Lola," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "It's good to finally meet you in person." Lola stepped forward, her legs shaky, but she forced herself to look him in the eye. "Mr. Bezos," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She wasn't sure what else to say. She had expected something grander, something more impressive. But instead there was only the soft murmur of the air conditioning and the steady ticking of a clock on the wall. The silence stretched between them, thick with anticipation. Jeff leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together as he regarded her. "I hear you've been through a lot recently, a lot more than most people would ever want to handle." Lola nodded slowly. "You could say that." "I know this is a lot to take in," he continued, his voice still smooth, like everything was under control. "But you made the right choice. The initiative isn't something people can just step into. You've been chosen for a reason, Lola." The words didn't make sense to her. Chosen for a reason? Chosen for what? What was the initiative, really? And why was she the one who had been pulled into this web of power and secrecy? "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head slightly. "What exactly do you want from me?" Jeff's expression didn't change. He was unreadable, a master of the game. "What I want is for you to use what you've been given, to make a difference, to help the initiative grow. You've seen the potential in yourself, Lola. You've already proven that you can be more than just a small-town waitress. Now it's time to embrace it." Lola's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what he was asking her to do. She didn't want to be part of something shady, something that would hurt people. She had always prided herself on the simple, honest life she had lived. But now that door had been closed, and she was standing at the edge of something far darker, far more complex. "What does the initiative want from me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. "Why me?" The corner of Jeff's mouth twitched, just the slightest hint of a smile. "You've been living under the assumption that you're just an ordinary person, Lola. That you're just a waitress. But that's not true. You've always had potential, and now it's time to use it. The initiative is about shaping the future, and you're a part of that now. We need people who can think beyond the boundaries, people who can see the bigger picture." Lola's mind whirled. She had never thought of herself as anything special. She had always kept to herself, had never been the type to make waves, but now Jeff was telling her that she had something inside her, something worth cultivating. He wasn't talking about a promotion or a job in a company. No, he was talking about power, and that was something she wasn't sure she could handle. "You're asking me to change who I am," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "You're asking me to join something I don't understand." Jeff's gaze softened, though there was still that controlled air about him. "No, Lola, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to see who you really are. You've been given a glimpse of something bigger. The question is, will you embrace it, or will you let fear hold you back?" Lola felt her hands trembling. She had never felt so small, so insignificant in all her life. But in that moment, as Jeff's eyes bored into hers, she realized something: she couldn't go back. Not after everything she had been through. Not after the way her world had been upended. She was already tangled up in this web, already a part of something much bigger than herself. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, looking down at her hands, unsure of what her next words would be. "I don't know if I can be part of this." Jeff leaned forward, his eyes steady, unwavering. "You are ready, Lola. You've been ready all along. The decision you make today will define everything that comes after. You don't have to understand it all right now. All you need to do is make the choice. Will you be part of the future we're building, or will you stand aside?" The silence stretched again, heavy and thick with expectation. Lola stared at Jeff, at the man who had built an empire, at the man who had so much power, so much control. He wasn't asking her to sign a contract. He was asking her to join something larger, something that could change the course of her life and the world forever. And in that moment, Lola knew there was no turning back. She was already part of something she didn't fully understand, something far beyond her imagination. But as Jeff sat across from her, waiting for a decision, she realized that she didn't have to understand everything right now. All she had to do was take that step. The step that would lead her into a world where power was the only currency that mattered. Lola took a deep breath, then slowly nodded. "I'm in." Jeff's smile finally broke through, but it was not a smile of warmth. It was a smile of victory. "Welcome to the initiative, Lola." And as the words left his lips, Lola realized that her life had just changed forever. Lola's world after that moment felt like a blur, a whirlwind of experiences that swept her off her feet and into a life she had never imagined. The days began to blend together, one indistinguishable from the next, as she was pulled deeper into the initiative's operations. There were meetings, strategy sessions, and cryptic briefings, all of them aimed at preparing her for what was coming next. Every task she was given seemed to stretch her limits, pushing her further into a realm of power, influence, and decisions that could alter the course of history. But with each passing day, Lola found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. The uncertainty that had gripped her at the beginning began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. The woman who had once been a simple waitress in a small-town diner was now a player in a high-stakes game. She had become part of a machine that operated in the shadows, a force that could shape the future, one decision at a time. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she had made the right choice. But each time she questioned herself, she remembered Mora's words. No one gets to sit on the sidelines. She had been given this opportunity, this power, and she couldn't waste it. Not when it had already cost her so much. Over time, Lola began to understand the true scope of the initiative. It wasn't just a group of powerful people pulling strings behind the scenes. It was something far bigger, a network that spanned the globe, influencing governments, corporations, and entire industries. They were the architects of the future, the ones who shaped policy, who decided who would rise and who would fall. They were the ones who controlled the flow of money, information, and technology. And now, Lola was one of them. But as she climbed higher within the initiative, she also began to see the darker side of this world. The power she wielded came at a cost. There were sacrifices to be made, people who would be hurt, lives that would be upended, all for the sake of the greater good, or so it was justified. Lola struggled with this. She had never been someone who wanted to hurt others, but as the stakes grew higher, she realized that every action had its consequences. Her first task as a member of the initiative had been to help influence a corporate deal, one that would make billions of dollars for the initiative's backers. The deal was already set in motion, but Lola's job had been to push it over the finish line. It was a simple task on the surface, but when she saw the impact of the deal on ordinary workers, people who would lose their jobs, their livelihoods, she was forced to confront the reality of the world she had entered. She questioned everything. Was this the price of power? Was this what it took to be part of something so much bigger than herself? There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her sleek, modern apartment, wondering if she could live with the decisions she had made. But every time she closed her eyes, she remembered Jeff Bezos' words. The world moves on whether you want it to or not. The question is, will you be part of it, or will you stand in the way? And so she kept moving forward. She kept pushing. She kept working. The initiative was her new reality, whether she liked it or not. But there were moments of clarity, too. Moments when Lola saw the power of what the initiative could do for good. When they used their influence to provide aid during natural disasters, when they pushed for environmental policies that could save the planet, when they worked to create systems that could provide education and healthcare to those who needed it most. For all the darkness that came with their power, there were sparks of light too. And those sparks made her believe that maybe, just maybe, the initiative wasn't all bad. Maybe in the right hands, power could be used to change the world for the better. Months passed, and as Lola's confidence grew, so did her role within the initiative. She started to take on more responsibilities, making decisions that would affect thousands, maybe even millions of lives. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that glass tower to meet Jeff Bezos. She had grown into someone who could make tough choices, someone who understood that the future was never clear, that every action had its trade-offs. But she also knew that the stakes were high, and there was no room for hesitation. One day, as she walked through the grand hallways of the initiative's headquarters, she was stopped by Mora. The older woman, who had been her mentor since the beginning, looked at her with a mix of pride and something else, something more complicated. "You've done well," Mora said, her voice soft but carrying weight. "Better than I expected." Lola nodded. She was still processing everything, still figuring out where she fit into this world. But she had earned Mora's respect. That meant something. "You made your choice," Mora continued. "You've stepped into the role you were always meant to play. But don't forget, the higher you climb, the harder the fall." Lola looked at Mora, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. She had come so far. She had seen things she couldn't unsee. She had made choices that would shape the future. She had power now. Real power. But the question lingered. Would she ever be able to truly reconcile her past with her present? Could she ever be the person she once was, the waitress who believed in simple things, in the goodness of people? Or had she crossed a line that she could never return from? As the days passed and Lola settled further into her new life, one thing became clear. The world she had entered was a world of contrasts, a world of light and dark, of good intentions and harsh realities. But in the end, Lola had made her choice. She had chosen to be part of something bigger, and now she would have to live with the consequences. But for better or worse, she was no longer the 91-year-old waitress from the diner. She was something else now. She was part of the initiative, and no matter what happened, there was no going back.